My name is Isabella Moore, and on the morning of my wedding, I stood at the altar in St. Helena's Cathedral with 200 eyes fixed on me. The ivory dress hugged my body like armor. The organ swelled with a hymn everyone knew by heart, and sunlight, from the stained glass windows, painted the floor with colors too beautiful for a day so ugly. I could feel my fiancé, Ethan Collins, squeeze my hand, his confident smile aimed at me. The same smile that once melted every doubt I had about us. In the front pew, my mother Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, the picture of maternal pride. But I no longer saw a proud mother or a devoted groom. I saw betrayal dressed up in formal wear. Just 24 hours earlier, I had read words in my mother's handwriting that scorched themselves into my mind. Words about desire, stolen hours, and promises whispered between her and Ethan. Words that made me understand that the two people who were supposed to protect me had been laughing behind my back. I remember standing there at the altar, my pulse hammering so loud it nearly drowned the music. Ethan leaned close and whispered, "You ready for forever?" His blue eyes sparkled as if nothing were wrong. I met his gaze, but my answer came from a place so raw it burned. "Oh, I'm ready," I whispered back. Ready to end the charade. Ready to let every soul in that church know the truth that had shattered me. They thought they were about to watch me become a wife. Instead, they were about to watch me become something else entirely, a woman who would no longer be anyone's fool. 3 months before that moment, my life looked perfect from the outside. I was 29, working as an editor at a publishing house in Boston, living in an apartment filled with books and mismatched furniture that I loved anyway. People said I had everything a young woman could want: a solid career, supportive parents, and a fiancé who seemed like the embodiment of every dream I ever confessed to my college roommate after midnight. Ethan was 32, tall and charming, a rising star at a downtown law firm. He drove a sleek black Lexus, wore tailored suits that fit as if they had been stitched for his shoulders alone, and spoke with the confidence of someone who had always known doors would open for him. When he proposed at a theater, during intermission of Swan Lake, the audience burst into applause, and I thought my life had turned into a fairy tale. My father, Reverend Thomas Moore, smiled that night with tears in his eyes. A pastor, for more than 3 decades, he believed in family as the cornerstone of faith, and to him, Ethan represented stability and honor. My mother, Margaret, beamed even brighter, clutching my engagement ring as though it were a trophy she had earned. "You've done so well, sweetheart." She told me her words more like a congratulation than a blessing. I thought she meant well. Looking back, I realized her tone was loaded with something else. From the moment Ethan slid that diamond on my finger, the wedding became Margaret's mission. She orchestrated every detail with military precision, from the flowers to the music to the cut of the cake. Whenever I suggested something simple, wildflowers for the bouquet, a string quartet instead of a full orchestra, she countered with her vision of grandeur. "Trust me, darling," she'd say, with a smile that matched mine in the mirror. Mother knows best. Ethan watched all of this with an amused detachment. He often lingered in the kitchen with her, laughing over her recipes, flattering her taste in wine. I thought it was sweet that they got along. I told myself that's what every girl dreams of, her mother and future husband sharing easy banter, while the house filled with the smell of roasted garlic and red wine. It never occurred to me that their laughter had a different edge, one that had nothing to do with me. The first time I felt the floor shift beneath my perfect little world was one Wednesday evening, 3 weeks before the wedding. I stopped by my parents' house after work to finalize seating arrangements. The place was quiet, strangely so. When I called out, my mother's voice came from the kitchen, high and breathless. I found her at the sink, scrubbing dishes that were already spotless. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair disheveled. "Oh, Isabella, I didn't expect you so soon," she said, though it was the exact time I always visited midweek. I noticed the faint scent of cologne, expensive masculine, out of place in that kitchen. A mug still steamed on the counter, one from our fine china set reserved for guests. When I asked whose it was, she hesitated, then claimed it was hers, that she had needed caffeine late in the evening. The lie was clumsy, and I knew it. My mother had never been a good liar, but love has a way of making us blind. I sat down with the RSVP cards, willing myself to ignore the unease scratching at my chest. She kept glancing at her phone, tapping her fingers on the counter. And when Ethan texted me that night, saying he had to work late, I saw her shoulders relax in a way that made no sense at all. I should have asked more questions. I should have pressed harder. But instead, I folded the seating chart and convinced myself it was nothing. Love teaches us to explain away the cracks, to call them quirks or coincidences. I didn't know yet that those cracks were only the beginning, and that soon they would split my entire world in two. The unease only grew sharper in the weeks that followed. Ethan started canceling our Thursday dinners, claiming work had him swamped. Twice he skipped cake tastings, and when I called his office one afternoon, his secretary told me he had left early. I drove to his apartment in the city, a place I had keys to, only to find the living room dim and a wine glass on the table, with lipstick smeared across the rim. The shade wasn't mine. I tried his bedroom door, but it was locked. That was strange. Ethan never locked doors inside his own home. His voice came muffled from the other side. "I'm not feeling well, Izzy. Food poisoning. You should go." Everything about his tone was off. Ethan had always been dramatic about being sick, the type who wanted soup and sympathy for a headache. But that night, he insisted I leave, almost panicked at the idea of me coming inside. I stood in that hallway with my heart pounding, every instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. Still, I let him win. I whispered through the door, "Feel better. I love you." He answered a beat too late, "Love you too." And the space between us widened into a canyon. I told myself I was overthinking that pre-wedding stress had me suspicious of shadows. I wanted to believe my life was still the fairy tale I'd been promised. But lies have a way of seeping through, and 2 days before my wedding, the truth spilled over. My mother called that afternoon. Her voice was casual, as if nothing in the world was wrong. "Darling, I left the wedding programs in my car. Could you pick them up for me? They're in a manila envelope on the passenger seat." "Of course," I said. Anything for her. The Mercedes was parked in front of our family home, gleaming in the sunlight. I opened the door and found the envelope right where she said it would be. But something else had slipped between the seats, a slim black leather notebook. My name was written on the cover in Margaret's familiar script. My stomach twisted as I pulled it free. The first page was dated 3 months ago, right after our engagement. The words blurred as I read, "Ethan Collins is everything I should have married. Handsome, successful, from the right family." Instead, I settled for Thomas and his sermons. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe I deserve something beautiful for once. I remember sitting there in her car, the afternoon sun slanting through the windshield, while my entire world tilted sideways. I flipped page after page, each entry, cutting deeper. She described stolen afternoons dinners that turned into kisses, kisses that turned into nights, in Ethan's apartment while I thought he was at work. She wrote about how alive she felt when he touched her, how he promised her they would find a way even after the wedding. The final entry was dated the night before. "Tomorrow will be our last time before he belongs to Isabella. We must be careful after that, but he says his heart belongs to me now." I dropped the notebook onto the seat as if it had burned me. My throat closed, my body shaking so violently I could barely breathe. My own mother, my fiancé, the two people I trusted most in the world, had turned me into a fool. I cried until I couldn't anymore. Tears blurred the neighborhood around me, children on bicycles, sprinklers watering neat lawns, life moving forward as if mine hadn't just collapsed. By the time the sun set, my sorrow had hardened into something sharper. They had chosen each other over me. Now I would choose myself over them. I didn't go home. Instead, I checked into a hotel downtown under a false name, paying cash and lying to the clerk that I was surprising my husband for an anniversary. Lying came easily now. Apparently, betrayal was contagious. In the room, I laid out everything like evidence: the journal, Ethan's credit card statements with expensive wine, purchases. My mother adored text messages, filled with excuses that now read like scripts rehearsed between them. I stared at it all and realized the old version of me, the forgiving, trusting Isabella, had died in that Mercedes. The new me didn't want private confrontations or whispered apologies. They deserved exposure. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about humiliation, about two people conspiring to use my life as their cover story. I called my assistant from work. Can you send me the full guest list, emails, numbers, social media? Everyone who'll be at the wedding. She hesitated, then agreed. Then I called Lena, my best friend, since college, now a freelance journalist in New York. I need you to be at the cathedral tomorrow with your press badge and your camera. Her voice was nervous. Bella, what are you planning? Something newsworthy, I said. Just trust me. The last call was the hardest. I dialed my father, knowing he was home after a long evening meeting. When he picked up, his voice was warm, unsuspecting. Dad, I love you. I said, my voice cracking. No matter what happens tomorrow, remember that. This isn't your fault. He asked me what I meant, but I couldn't tell him. Not yet. Everything's going to be right, I said softly. When I hung up, I stared out the hotel window at the city lights, my reflection staring back at me. I had always believed revenge was about pain, but justice was about truth. Tomorrow, I decided I would serve justice with a smile. Dawn broke clean and cold, the kind of New England morning that makes the sky look scrubbed. I showered until the steam erased the hotel mirror, and then looked myself in the eye, really looked as if I were meeting a stranger I needed to trust. I drove to St. Helena's with the dress in the back seat and the leather notebook zipped into my bag. The cathedral rose out of the neighborhood like something carved from winter, itself all stone and shadow and impossible expectation. Inside the bridal room, the buzz felt unreal, like stepping into a movie I hadn't agreed to star in. My maid of honor fussed with my hair, the photographer asked me to tilt my chin, and my phone kept lighting up with text bubbles from my mother, all hearts and exclamation marks. I let the ivory dress fall over me, 1,000 tiny buttons closing up my back like a secret. When my father stepped into the doorway in his black tux, he smiled in a way I hadn't seen since I was little. That smile faltered when he saw my face. Bella, are you all right? I pressed the journal into his hands. He opened to the middle and began to read. The color drained from his cheeks, and for a moment, I thought he might sit right down on the floor. He didn't. He closed the book, his fingers trembling around the edges, and looked at me with a mixture of grief and fierce pride. What do you want to do? He asked. Walk me down the aisle, I said. Then stand by me when I tell the truth. He nodded like a man stepping into deep water. When the coordinator called 5 minutes, he offered his arm. We moved toward the sanctuary doors, the sound of the organ unfurling through the air like a ribbon. The congregation rose, cameras flashed. Ethan stood at the altar with that attorney's posture that always made judges listen. My mother sat front row, emerald silk, catching the light, a handkerchief poised under one eye. I felt the press of my father's arm and the strange weightlessness that comes right before a freefall. We reached the front. He placed my hand into Ethan's, then stepped aside. The ceremony moved forward with the smooth inevitability of a train on well-laid tracks. Words about love and faith and reverence washed over us. I heard none of it. I watched Ethan's mouth, the practiced confidence in the curve of his smile. I watched my mother's chest rise and fall, the handkerchief moving like a white flag she would never wave. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, the church went still as a held breath. I didn't speak. Not yet. I wanted them to feel safe one last time. Do you, Ethan Collins, take Isabella Moore? I do, he said, steady as a promise he had never intended to keep. And do you? Isabella? Before I answer, I said, and my voice traveled through the sound system with a clarity that startled even me. I need to tell you the truth. The organ stopped mid-phrase. The murmurs died. I stepped away from Ethan and closer to the microphone. I could feel my father behind me, like a pillar, like a vow no one could break. I stand here wearing a dress my mother helped choose, I said, and holding the hand of the man I was supposed to marry. 24 hours ago, I found my mother's journal in her car. In her own handwriting, she described an affair with my fiancé that has been going on for months. Last night, I swallowed, letting the words cut their way out. They were together in my parents' home while my father was at a church meeting. It was like dropping a match into dry brush. Gasps leapt from pew to pew. Someone fumbled a program, and it hit the stone with a slap. I saw Lena near the back, her camera lifted and steady. My mother froze the handkerchief slack in her lap. Ethan reached for me, and I stepped back. "I have the journal," I said, lifting the leather book, "and the receipts for the wine you bought her with our joint credit card, Ethan." Her favorite vintage over and over like a signature. Judge firm composure cracked. He looked toward his parents, who stared back at him as if he had turned into a stranger. My mother found her voice first small and desperate. "Isabella, please. You misunderstood." "Sit down." "Margaret," my father said. 30 years in a pulpit gave those words enough gravity to drop the entire church an inch. She sank back into the pew as if her knees had given out. Ethan tried again, softer. "Izzy, can we talk privately?" "We had months for private," I said. "Today belongs to the truth." I stared at him until he had to look away. Then I turned to the crowd, to the world I had grown up in, to the faces that had watched me sing in choirs and light candles on Christmas Eve. I won't build a marriage on someone else's lies. Not mine, not my father's, not this church's. I lifted the veil from my hair and handed it to my maid of honor. The strings of my dress whispered as I turned. I kissed my father's cheek, tasting salt and something like relief. Then I walked down the aisle, alone, the train of my gown drawing a pale river over the stone. Outside, the air hit me like an absolution. I stood on the steps, my heart battering against my ribs, and listened to the sound of a life collapsing inside a sacred space. Doors opened and shut, voices rose, footsteps hurried. My phone vibrated in my bag without stopping. I let it. Lena found me first. She stopped a respectful distance away. I got everything she said, breathless. "Are you okay?" "I'm standing," I said. "For now, that's enough." The words tasted like iron, but they were true. By evening, the video had already started to spread. By nightfall, it was everywhere. My inbox filled with messages from strangers, some offering sympathy, some salivating for drama. The law firm announced Ethan would take indefinite leave to address personal matters, the kind of sentence people write when they want to bury a scandal under polite language. The church community rallied around my father with casseroles and quiet prayers on porches. My mother's orbit collapsed. Invitations evaporated. Board positions vanished. She called. I let the calls go to voicemail and listened to the silence afterward, like it might tell me something more than her words ever could. 2 days later, my father packed his study into cardboard boxes labeled with the same careful hand that had written his sermons. He had decided to step down, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he believed a pastor should not ask others to carry burdens he wasn't strong enough to lift himself. I told him he was wrong about his strength. He smiled and put another book in a box. A small church in Vermont needed an interim minister. He said the winters would be brutal and the people kind. Judge Collins came by the house while we were lifting boxes into the trunk. He looked smaller without the robe of authority that a courtroom gives a person. He apologized not for himself, but for raising a son who had confused charm with character. I told him that character belongs to the person who builds it, and that he and his wife should be gentle with themselves while they figured out what came next. Grief sat heavy in his eyes when he thanked me. The weeks staggered forward. For a while, sleep came like a stranger who refused to cross my threshold. I woke to the echo of the organ or the phantom heat of Ethan's hand in mine. I learned the difference between the ache of missing what I had and the deeper ache of missing what I thought I had. One is a bruise, the other is a fault line. I threw myself into work and then changed it altogether. A publishing house in New York offered a position that required more backbone than I knew I had. I took it, packed my books and a few plants, and left Boston with the sunrise chasing me along the highway. The city welcomed me without questions. I walked streets where no one recognized my face from a video, and for the first time in months, the air felt wide. 6 months after the non-wedding, I stood in the small garden behind my apartment, deadheading the last of the summer blooms when the doorbell rang. A delivery man held a bouquet of wildflowers, the kind I had wanted to carry on my wedding day before someone else's taste steamrolled mine. The card read in a tidy hand I didn't recognize. for choosing yourself, from someone who understands. I set them on the kitchen table and watched the room soften into something I could live in. My father called every Sunday evening. From Vermont, he described sermons that were less about perfection and more about mercy. He told me that when the snow came, it made the trees look like they were holding up the sky. He never asked about my mother, not directly. Sometimes he said he hoped we would both find a road back to each other someday, not because she deserved it, but because forgiveness, when it's earned, can feel like spring. I saw Margaret once from across a grocery store parking lot when I went home to help my father sell the house. She had fewer friends and more time. Our eyes met. She lifted a hand as if to wave, then let it fall. I got into my car and drove away. There are conversations that only time can make honest. We weren't there yet. A year after the church, I stood at a podium under a chandelier in a hotel ballroom and spoke about voice, how you find it, and how you keep it when people try to pry it from your throat. Women came up afterward and told me their stories in low voices that shook. They asked me how I knew when to stay and when to leave. I said I didn't always know. I only knew the truth might burn your life down, but the ashes are honest, and you can plant something new in honest ground. That night in my hotel room, the city glittered like a field of patient stars. I poured a glass of wine and held it up to the window, a small toast to every person who has stood at an altar, any altar, and chosen themselves. I thought about the aisle at St. Helena's, how the stones felt under my heels, how the air tasted when I stepped into it. I used to think the climax of my story happened when I said no in front of everyone who expected a yes. I see it differently now. The climax wasn't the refusal. It was the decision to belong to myself afterward, day after day, in ways no camera could capture. Sometimes justice looks like headlines. Sometimes it looks like a quiet apartment with a vase of wildflowers and a woman closing her eyes in a city that doesn't know her past. Either way, it's a life you choose, and this time no one chooses it for you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.